What I really, really hate is when somebody says, "Oh, I'm not as bad as," or "What about blah 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 blah." It's like if somebody said, so say for instance, right, if my mate went out and he cheated on his missus, went home with a girl or a boy or whatever, and then I went out on that very same night and ended up smooching three girls. Obviously, I'm in a happy committed relationship. I'd never do such a thing. But, so I've gone out and smooched three girls, and he's gone out and cheated on his missus. And he would then turn around and say, he would then obviously be like really in trouble. And my missus would be saying, like, oh, well, you know, you went out and you smooched three other girls. How could you do that? And then the sort of person that turns around and says, yeah, but I'm not as bad as my mate who went out and cheated on his missus. No, no, not at all. Saying that you're not as bad as somebody else is like a race to the bottom, because that means that to retain the moral ground that you have, you simply have to be not worse than the worst case scenario. It's like it's this is how standards get dropped, is when people start saying, oh well, I'm not as bad as somebody else. It's not about not being the worst, it's about trying to be the best, trying to make the effort to be the best, rather than just saying, oh well, at least I'm not the worst. Because that's a drop in quality. That's a drop in quality, and it's a drop in standards, and it's a race to the bottom. It is the language of racing to the bottom. And then there are people who use what's known as whataboutisms, and that's kind of like deflecting from their own behaviour by saying, oh, well, what about what X, Y, and Z did? So, if, same scenario, I've gone out and I've smooched three girls, and the missus says to me, Ben, why did you smooch those three girls? And I said, oh, but what about my mate? Did you not hear what he did? He did something far worse than me, which deflects from the real question that I should have to answer. It is, why did I smooch three girls? That's the thing, is that it's all about not taking ownership for what we've done wrong. And I talk a lot about like admitting to what we've done wrong. It's not so much that what we've done wrong, or the lack of ability to admit that what we do wrong holds us back, because it really does, quite substantially. That lack of humility, that it's of the seven deadliest sins, pride's the deadliest. Pride is the one that's going to get you, and it's and that not having that lack of humility is obviously something else as well. But it's also when we start to use language like, oh, I'm not as bad as, or what about what somebody else did, that's a race to the bottom. It's a race to the bottom, because it's kind of like you're not aiming for a high standard. It's just that you're trying to avoid the lowest one. And that, in my opinion, like that kind of it breeds a society where people want to work just hard enough to get by, or want to do just enough to get by, that don't want to do the best, because as long as they're not the worst, they don't have to be the best performer, just as long as they're not the worst. Just a thought.